let's talk crime, shall we? Because we all know by now that shoplifting seems to be, in lots of occasions, going through the roof. But what do you do about that? That is the million-dollar question. Many people will say that the police don't seem to perhaps be taking it as seriously as they should, and it's causing frustration by many. And I would say it's causing many thieves to be quite emboldened. We see those videos now, don't we? People just walking in and just sweeping off whole shelves and helping themselves without a care in the world. And now a story caught my eye because you've seen now a fella with 105 prior convictions. He has been jailed, but get this, it's by private prosecution. This was after the police basically didn't do anything about this crime, despite the fact that the company involved, M&S, actually had CCTV showing a lot of it happening. Annunziata, it caught my eye as being interesting, this, because I believe that we should be relying on our police forces to, kind of follow through the law of the land. But when that's being failed, very often is the case now with shoplifting and stuff like that, is this what people need to do now? Pay their own money to sort it out?
I think it's perfectly reasonable that they do, and actually it was how it always used to work, that if you go back to 1981, virtually every prosecution for shoplifting in the Met Police area was brought as a private prosecution. And it has become done by the state, and it is returning, as they've failed to enforce it, to the private sector. And I don't actually think that's necessarily a bad thing if our court system worked efficiently and was providing value for money, because an awful lot of the time, particularly with small traders, it is by no means worth their while to proceed in a prosecution.
James?
But I think that's exactly the problem. Perhaps in this world, it's fine for the M&Ss because they will have the good CCTV and the security staff to give witness statements or whatever it is that you precisely need. But for smaller victims of crime, they won't be able to do anything. I think, very clearly, the state, the justice system, the police are the ones that should be doing the job. And it shouldn't be falling through the cracks so that some people who can, to turn something into a pay-to-play seems to be, fundamentally not equality before the law.
And wasn't this one of the key things that Labour was suggesting, that they would almost try and clamp down on what many people would perhaps call petty crime? But do we need almost like a broken windows type policing strategy? So for those that are not familiar, basically what that means is that the police, whether it's a broken window or a piece of graffiti or whatever, the theory would be that you tackle the small stuff and hopefully that would stop some of the mushrooming out.
Not only hopefully, that where it's been tried, it has virtually always worked and worked very, very well. New York was the biggest example. And by stopping people very early on in a very minor petty criminal path, they don't go on to do the larger crimes. It's the general theory, and it does appear to work time and again in various different countries. In London now, there does seem to be a complete disrespect for the police. And I think that is very worrying for the safety of all Londoners and all visitors to London, that there's a lack of fundamental respect for them, because I think most of us know they're not out catching people whilst they're doing things. And therefore, there's not the fear that does need to be there, that you might get caught.
I always feel bad for individual officers, and I know that former officers, I get emails from you guys, I know people, some of you watch and your children are police officers, and it makes me I almost feel bad for the individuals, because as we saw when there was that sword attack the other day, a lot of officers are really brave and they go running towards things, and it's often not their choice to focus on stuff like stupid tweets or to turn a blind eye to this. It's more the policy that's coming down from the management level that dictates what they're spending their time on. Yeah,
quite right, and that's the level to be looking at it. And I think one word of caution about the broken windows thing. If you create new offences and they become a road into prison, that can be a way to teach people more types of crime. And we saw some of that when we had ASPOs under New Labour, creating new types of petty crime, which then ended up with people in prison. But a more important point about trust in the police and so on, I think, we're talking about a really large overhaul of the Met and the need for a very large overhaul of the Met. And I think if we're going to do that, we should start thinking again about where policing should start, which should be in the community and with community oversight. So any reform of the police should try to start more at that level you're saying, more at the level of an individual officer and their beat, and then how does that connect up to larger and larger structures, rather than what I fear we will get, which will be a kind of a top-down fix where they'll say, well, we'll do a different cultural change here, we'll have some different policy there, and things will change a bit, but they might get worse in some other ways.
Absolutely. One of my close relations used to be a PCSO, and he knew on his patch every single 12-year-old who was heading down the wrong route and knew to keep an eye and have a quiet word, which was incredibly effective. And as soon as you lose that connection to the streets, to the people living in the area, I think that whole level is gone. But the biggest thing about preventing crime, the biggest form of deterrent, is certainty that you will be caught and punished, not the severity of that punishment. And it's the deterrent effect is knowing that you will be caught. And I think that is the piece of the puzzle we're completely missing at the moment.
And even caring, actually, if you will be caught, because a lot of people perhaps think that they might be caught, but actually they don't care if they are. Let me ask you this. There's a patch that has been kind of created to commemorate fallen police officers. It's called the Thin Blue Line patch. So, as you might imagine, it's got a thin blue line running through it, running through the flag. Now, there's some issues about whether or not the police should be able to wear this on their uniforms. So there was a lady on social media, she'd seen an officer with the patch at a recent protest and gone online and complained about it and all the rest of it. And it transpires that actually there's a concern about the fact that over in America, and I say this, it makes me cringe saying this. Apparently there's some concern that over in America, that symbol has been captured by the so-called far right, and that is perhaps making it contentious here, and therefore the police shouldn't perhaps be wearing that patch. What do you think to that?
I think that just as soldiers and airmen and sailors wearing a poppy is completely acceptable to remember their fallen colleagues, it is completely acceptable for the police to remember those who've put their lives on the line for our country as well. And the fact that someone somewhere thinks it reminds them of something completely different shouldn't be either here nor there.
James?
I agree that in general terms, if someone somewhere thinks something is something, it should neither be here nor there. But I think that, especially when the head of the Met said you can't have any other types of insignia or anything like that, I think it is an easier path to go down to just say your uniform is your uniform, that's what you wear, apart from on particular commemorative days and so on, in which case other insignia and other things can be worn. But I think that's probably a neater way of doing it, where you aren't getting into the what does the patch actually mean and what's its derivation and what meaning does it have in other contexts. You can just say, you can't have one with a rainbow flag either. You can't have one with anything for anything. You wear your uniform and that's that.
Yeah, apparently there's 3 exceptions listed. There's the red poppy of the Royal British Legion, the Help for Heroes badge and wristband as well. But you see, what I found interesting is because we asked the Met Police about this, and they said actually that this badge hasn't been banned. It's just that the official line is, as I've just described, that you can only wear those 3 things, that one particular badge, the wristband and the poppy. But I also found it quite interesting that Mark Rowley, he was saying, I understand that officers care deeply, obviously, about their fallen colleagues and that they want to show that they care. But he goes on to say that this symbol has ended up being both a policing symbol and is being used by some hard right groups. And that's why it's tricky territory and this is contentious. But I would actually say we need to pack it in, worrying too much about what on earth is going on in the States and importing that kind of ridiculousness often into the streets of Britain, because many people here, they see that thin blue line, they absolutely regard it in its intention, and the officers are wearing it in their intention to show respect. What people might interpret it as in America is irrelevant.
I would agree. I do have some sympathy for only being allowed to wear it on specific days or a particular period. That poppies people generally wear for 2-3 weeks running up to Armistice Day. And if it was something similar and there was, I don't know, an Yvonne Fletcher memorial or something, totally. Absolutely they should be allowed to. But I think we do need to disentangle Americanisation of our British emblems.
And especially on policing. I mean, we really don't want to be going down the way of US American policing.
No. absolutely.
Yeah, but we do import lots of Americanisms into this country. And it worries me, actually, because the two countries are completely different. And we see loads of stuff now. So a lot of, we started off the programme talking about Israel and Gaza. We're seeing a lot of protesting now at various places, like lots of the universities and colleges and stuff like that. And now that's getting imported here as well. It seems like so many people just seem to copy what's going on there and are devoid of a lot of original thoughts. Am I being harsh?
I think in general terms, the US has such huge communicative power that we do end up importing things for good and for bad, and we should be more discerning about what things are good and what things are bad. I think in terms of protest tactics, generally those flow in all sorts of different directions. And for example, the Occupy that was in the US, that really came from Egypt and Tunisia. And
what was the Occupy, for people who are not familiar with it?
Sorry, Occupy Wall Street in 2011. Where they occupied Zuccotti Park, which was a very big thing and became better known because it was there in New York, but that had come from Athens and from Spain and from Egypt and from Tunisia. So I think protest tactics, they move around the world in different ways. But in general terms, especially on policing and community relations and so on, we should be very, very wary of importing anything from the US because their methods of policing and their policing outcomes are not ones that we would want to replicate here. Although we are still, as we all are, critical of what's going on here presently.
Yeah, and we should also be very, very wary about bowing down to every single group of random people that seem to be offended about absolutely everything these days. Are you a police officer or a former police officer? What does that patch mean to you, the thin blue line? Do you share this notion that somehow, in some odd parallel universe, this somehow represents the far right or the hard right, whatever that sentence even means these days?